In terms of like, because I do have quite a few people that are still sitting on the fence as to whether they can like and going to go and do this on their own or actually using a buyer's agent. So I think like the way that you make it sound there, like it sounds like a bit easier than it actually probably is to do it. So
well yeah, and the most important thing is to take action here. Now, the problem is that there's a lot of analysis paralysis, a lot of podcasts, a lot of information out there. There's a lot of time to go and pound the pavements. Yeah, for example, you've got suburbs. Even if you know a good suburb, what are the best pockets of those suburbs? What are the best streets? Are you going to get the best deal in that particular suburb? And so there's a number of things that it comes back to. There's a number of suburbs in Australia. And so can you be across all of those suburbs and where there's value? And so that's when kind of engaging a professional who can do all of this heavy lift, who's already done it, not do it now, who's already done it. And so who can actually fast track that sort of method and process for you, because the longer you leave it, especially in certain markets, then the like just 1% growth in a certain market, for example, just do that on sort of, 700,000 purchase price. That means it's cost you kind of a buyer's agency fee already almost. And then if you kind of wait 2-3 months or 6 months or whatever it's going to be, in sometimes you've actually lost that whole suburb. Frankston's a good example of this in Melbourne, for example. Like people just umming and ahhing, looking at comps at sort of 650, for example, couldn't make a decision. And then if we fast forward to 3 months, those same properties are 800 plus.
On the topic of opportunity cost though, I feel like it's very easy to just know that there's an opportunity cost there, but like what are the numbers that we're actually, it obviously varies between like different markets and that, but like what are the numbers that we're actually talking? Like if you are waiting 3 months, 6 months, like even a month, like the market's moving quite quickly at the moment, as we all know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I just came up with say 1%, for example, that might be a bit aggressive or whatever, but say 1% on 700,000 purchase price, $7,000. Just missing out on it. And that obviously varies. I mean, that's just kind of like a generic sort of thing. If you're trying to get into the best pockets and the best areas in a particular suburb, might be a little bit more, but that's the opportunity cost of not taking action. For like, I remember going back to Logan, 2019, getting lots of people sort of like through areas and suburbs, etc. Those markets move very quickly. So, I think having a buyer's agency there in your corner who's going to find the good assets, the 8 out of 10 type asset, ticks 8 boxes out of 10, that's going to be a very solid performer, and getting something sort of, bought for you sort of pretty early in the cycle, sort of alleviates that sort of opportunity cost. If you can get something that's even better value as well, that's kind of what we do. That's what we look for.
And so do you have like an example, Steve, as to someone that has bought like, say, late last year and what that property is worth today, just so that we can actually get a really good understanding of what that's looking like?
Well, no. We had a couple looking to get on the market and turned down a couple of deals early on, but we've managed to get a good one off market around about the 625,000 mark. That's now been revalued at 700,000 in that particular suburb, and that we're talking about a period of 5 months.
Wow.
6 months actually of time of recording. So if you think about that, that's a 10% uplift already, or a little slightly more than 10, more like 12% on purchase. So had they kept waiting, obviously the market would have moved.
So 75 grand in 5 months.
Yeah, not bad at all. Yeah. And obviously there's examples kind of which are a lot better than that, but I don't want to sort of bring them up. I'd say roughly the average in the areas that we're looking at. We're very early stage in the cycle. We're starting to see a bit of heat come into those markets. And so we're kind of aiming for that 5 to 10% uplift. If we can get it on purchase more towards 5%, but then 6 months down the track, we're seeing a lot of these kind of like examples where people are already up 10% who've taken action, in some cases even more.
And I think that just really does highlight like that opportunity cost of waiting 6 months. Like you're talking upwards of like $75,000.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think even one. So we had one client who wanted to do a bit of sweat equity uplift. He bought in a suburb like in New South Wales, like close to where you are, Jess. He got it for $645,000. He had to do a $50,000 reno on that, and it's just been revalued $850, and that's in 9 months. So I mean, I can think of a number of other sort of instances of that. If you're going to roll your sleeves up, potentially there's more uplift, but you set and forget. Still in these areas that we're looking in, like the example I gave, 10% is very achievable.
Thanks so much for those examples. It definitely really highlights that. And Steve, so from a high level, without going into too much detail, how would you say that you're choosing the suburbs that you are buying for clients? And in particular, like how are you using a different approach to most other buyers agencies because you do have that investment banking background?
Well, yeah, I'd say there's a couple of things really. And so the obvious one, like within sort of investment banking, like on investment banking, you work on the sell side. So that's, so you work with some pretty smart sort of funds. And so with that, you kind of like, you have to sort of level up your knowledge and research. So something that really kind of stuck out to me during that period was value investing. So the classic Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett principles. I can go on, there's loads of others, but they're obviously the recognizable names. And so value investing is really kind of like trying to get $1 for 50 cents. You're trying to find undervalued assets and undervalued areas, undervalued markets. And so that was one of the biggest things that we kind of like looked at, kind of how kind of these great clients and great fund managers out there were kind of evaluating assets and then trying to bring that into property, because it's much easier to sort of value a property than it is, say, a company where you've got to sort of calculate kind of what the tangible assets are. And so really, bring in those sort of methodologies and then kind of bringing that into sort of looking at kind of undervalued kind of markets, then suburbs, and then from a micro level, the assets that you're trying to protect. That could be the square meter rate of the property, sort of like looking at comps in the area, looking at kind of floor plans where you can actually add another sort of bedroom or add the bathroom, and then looking at kind of what the median might be for 3-bed or 1 bath, as opposed to sort of 4-bed, 2 baths. So all of these concepts are sort of like kind of, I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to do that. So that's definitely one thing that's quite important. The value investing principles, I think that's the best way to invest. And that's something I picked up on when I was investment banking. The second one, when you work and it's probably the same for most corporate, but particularly like the tier 1 banks like Goldman Sachs, is the compliance aspect. And you've got to make sure within that, it's drilled into you about doing the right thing for clients, and it's drilled into ensure that the asset you're buying is going to be investment grade, so to speak, and that there's protection for the clients and a margin of safety when you're looking at that. So bringing that in is kind of, lots of training that I've gone through my investment banking life to have that nutted in. So I'd say those are the two things that we bring to property investing and the portfolio construction point when we're building portfolios out for people.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's something that's very unique because not a lot of people have that background as well to then go into property investing from there. Let's just say we completely wiped your investment banking background. Like, how would you say that you'd actually approach it very differently?
Well, I think there's a lot. Even if you just kind of look at the podcasts that we put out there, the shows that I've done with Pizza and Property, etc., everyone's just interested in hotspots. And so it then becomes a little bit like kind of spotting the next, I don't know, meme coin, or to bring it into something like that, or the penny stock that's going to go to the moon. So trying to get rich quick scheme. And that's really what hotspotting is to some degree. You're kind of looking at quite regional potentially, looking at sort of a market that's got a lot of risk and that doesn't have, very high population, but where you might see sort of a 20, 30% uplift if you're lucky. And so then it becomes like prospecting for gold. And I think if I didn't have all of these kind of portfolio construction and kind of like that long-term sort of view on building out a portfolio and looking at compound interest to work for you, I think it all becomes about where's the next kind of, where's the next Darwin, for example, where's the next place that's going to go boom or whatever. And then not really thinking about, well, how is that going to get me to my end goal? Because I might just buy that property, it might do very well, that area might do, but then it might be flat for another 10, 15 years. But I reckon if I wouldn't have had kind of like that grounding and looking at that end goal and that bigger picture, I think I'd have just been I'd fallen into the obvious path, which is the exciting bit, which is trying to get rich quick.
Yeah, and you can just based off what you just told me there, like you can honestly see it's like chalk and cheese, like worlds apart as to what your approach would be from your investment banking background and what it would have been if you didn't have that.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I see it, talking to clients, I see it talking to friends, etc. It's all about, you just have to look at Bitcoin, but everyone's trying to get rich quick. And that's not what investing is. Investing is kind of like looking at risk management and looking at downside and making sure you're doing the right thing and buying the right type of assets. And I think if I didn't have that investment banking background, that would have gone out the window and it would all have been about what's the next big thing.